My name is Raymond Colton, and I was 61 years old the morning I found an envelope in my father's roll-top desk that changed everything I thought I knew about the last 30 years of my life. The desk was made of white oak. It smelled like pipe tobacco and cedar and something older than both. The particular stillness of a room that had held its breath for a very long time. My father had been dead for 11 days. My mother was in the sunroom with her sisters, and the sound of their low voices drifted down the hall like something half-remembered. None of them knew I had gone upstairs. None of them knew what I was looking for. But here's what none of them knew. I had already spoken to an attorney. Welcome back to Channel, where quiet patience always outlasts loud cruelty. If you've ever been the one who kept the family together, while someone else quietly decided what you were worth, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. The envelope was plain. White, standard size, the kind you could buy at any post office counter. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting, not printed, not typed, his actual hand. The letters were careful and deliberate, the way he wrote when something mattered. My full name is Raymond Arthur Colton. I was 61 years old that November, and I had lived in Harwick, Pennsylvania my entire life, on Delwood Road specifically, in the house my wife Eleanor and I had bought in 1989 for $112,000. Eleanor had been gone for 4 years by the time I found that envelope. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in February, gone by August. The house still had her reading glasses on the nightstand. I had not moved them. I worked in civil engineering for 33 years. I retired from Keswick Municipal at 58, 2 years after Eleanor passed, because the commute had started to feel like something I was doing for someone else. I had enough. Not extravagantly, but enough. The mortgage was paid off. The pension came in reliably on the 3rd of every month. I had a small brokerage account I had been adding to quietly since 1994, and a savings passbook from Harwick Federal Credit Union that I kept in the top drawer of my own desk, not because the balance was remarkable, but because Eleanor had started it and I did not want to move it to somewhere digital and cold. My parents, Gerald and Miriam Colton, had lived 6 blocks away on Fenner Street for as long as I could remember. The house was a 2-story colonial with a covered porch and a hydrangea bush along the left side that my mother replanted every 3 years without fail. My father had been an insurance adjuster for 40 years. My mother had worked part-time at the public library until her knees gave out. They were not wealthy people, or so I had always believed. I was their only child. That fact mattered more than I understood at the time. I had always been attentive to them in a way that an only child learns to be, not out of obligation, exactly, but out of something that had calcified over decades into a kind of reflex. I drove my mother to her cardiologist appointments at St. Raphael Medical every 3rd Thursday for 6 years, from the time her arrhythmia was first diagnosed in the spring of 2014 until the week before she stopped needing to go. I paid the property taxes on the Fenner Street house for the last 9 years of my father's life, every January, without discussion, because they had started to fall behind after my mother's hospitalizations, and I did not want them to worry. I handled their home insurance renewal every August, called the contractor when the porch boards rotted, arranged a landscaping crew that came every 2 weeks from May through October, and sat with my father every Sunday evening at the kitchen table on Fenner Street, while he worked through the crossword puzzle he could no longer finish on his own. I am not listing these things for sympathy. I am listing them because they are the record, because what came later required that the record exist. Eleanor had known all of it. She never questioned it. She had grown up in a family where children cared for parents as a matter of course, and she saw my attentiveness to Gerald and Miriam as one of the things about me she trusted most. On the night of our wedding, August 14th, 1988, at St. Catherine's on Maple Street, my parents stood beside me in the receiving line and smiled at every guest with a particular pride of people who had raised something they were pleased with. My mother held my arm. My father shook hands firmly and said the same thing to each guest. He's a good boy, always has been. I heard it 30 or 40 times that evening. I did not think anything of it. That was my first error. In the months after Eleanor passed, my parents called more frequently. My mother in particular, 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes daily. I did not mind. I understood loneliness in a way I had not before Eleanor. I drove to Fenner Street on Tuesday and Thursday evenings and sat with them. I brought groceries. I fixed the side door latch that had been sticking since 2019. I drove my father to his appointment with Dr. Alan Pressler, internist at Harwood Community Hospital, on October 7th, 2021, and sat in the waiting room for 2 hours while they ran blood work and a stress test. I drove him home and made him a sandwich in his own kitchen. His hands had a faint tremor by then that neither of us mentioned. The savings passbook was a revealed object I carried in those years without knowing it. Eleanor had opened the account in 1997. $500 to start, added to slowly and deliberately ever since. It sat in the top drawer of my desk on Delwood Road with a balance of $83,412 as of the last entry. I had not touched the principal in 11 years. I do not know why I am telling you this now except that the passbook and what it represented, patience, steadiness, the long accumulation of quiet decisions, is what made everything that followed possible. My father died on a Monday, November 3rd, a clear, cold morning. He had been declining since August, and Dr. Pressler had told me in a phone call on September 29th at 4:15 in the afternoon that the timeline was likely weeks rather than months. I thanked him. I said nothing to my mother immediately. I drove to Fenner Street that evening and sat at the kitchen table and helped my father with his crossword while the radiator ticked and the kitchen smelled of the chicken soup. My mother made every Monday without variation. He died quietly in the early morning. My mother called me at 6:08 a.m. I was at the house by 6:40. I had already decided, somewhere in the drive over on the empty early morning roads, that I would be the one to handle the arrangements. I always had been. That was not a decision so much as a continuation of what had always been true. What I had not decided, what I had not yet thought about at all, was what I would find in the roll-top desk. My father's affairs were not complicated, or so my mother told me the morning after the funeral, when the relatives had gone and the house was quiet again, and she sat across from me at the Fenner Street kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she had stopped drinking. The kitchen smelled of cut flowers going stale, and the dish soap someone had used to wash the reception platters. The overhead light buzzed faintly. Outside the window, the hydrangea bush had gone brown for winter. "There's an attorney," my mother said. "His name is Whitfield. He has the documents." "What documents?" I said. She looked at her tea. "The estate documents. Your father handled all of it. I never got involved." I said nothing. She looked up. "Raymond, your father loved you. You know that." "I know that," I said. He had his own way of thinking about things." I waited. "He believed that money caused problems between families. He always said so. You know how he was." My stomach dropped. Not because of what she said, because of a particular careful way she said it. The way a person arranges sentences when they are managing information rather than sharing it. "I'm sure Mr. Whitfield will explain everything," she said. She stood up and took her mug to the sink. That was November 7th. The appointment with Randall Whitfield, estate attorney at Whitfield and Crane on Commerce Street, was scheduled for November 19th. My mother called me on November 9th to confirm that she had spoken to him and that he was expecting both of us. She called me again on November 11th to say that her sister Pauline would be joining us. Pauline, my mother's younger sister. She had lived in Wilmington for 20 years and visited at Christmas and occasionally in summer. She and my father had never been warm with each other. I had noticed that without ever examining it. I said nothing about Pauline joining the meeting. Something in my chest went still. On November 12th, I drove to Fenner Street on the pretext of checking the furnace filter, something I did every fall. The house had the particular feeling of a place that had recently held many people and was now adjusting back to silence. I checked the filter. I changed it. I went upstairs to my father's study to look for the warranty file for the furnace, which I had filed in myself 3 years earlier. The roll-top desk was unlocked. It was always unlocked. My father had not locked it in my memory. The warranty file was in the second drawer. I found it in under a minute, and then I saw the envelope. It was sitting in the back of the bottom drawer, behind a hanging file folder labeled insurance. Home. The envelope was sealed. My name was on the front in my father's handwriting. There was no other marking on it. My hands went cold. I stood in that room for what felt like a long time. The window looked out over the backyard. The light was flat and gray, the kind of November light that makes everything look like a document. The radiator in the corner ticked once and went quiet. I put the envelope in the inside pocket of my jacket. I went downstairs. I told my mother the filter had been fine. I drove home. I did not open it that night. I called Catherine Moorfield the following morning. Catherine was a family law attorney in Harwick. She had handled Eleanor's estate, and before that she had drawn up our wills in 2008. I had her number in my phone. I called at 8:47 a.m. on November 13th and left a message. She returned my call at 9:22 a.m. "Don't open it yet," she said when I described the situation. "Not until we've talked. Can you come in Thursday?" "Yes," I said. I said nothing else to my mother that week. She called twice. I answered both times. I was pleasant. I was normal. I told her I was looking forward to the Whitfield meeting. I asked how she was sleeping. Something in me had gone very still. The kind of stillness that happens not when you are afraid, but when you have already decided something without yet knowing exactly what it is. At the Whitfield meeting on November 19th, Randall Whitfield, a careful man of perhaps 65 with reading glasses on a chain and a manner that suggested decades of delivering news, people did not want, read from a document for 45 minutes. The room smelled of wood polish and old paper. The carpet was burgundy. Pauline sat to my mother's left with her hands folded. The estate was not what I had expected. My father had maintained a separate investment account at Crestline Capital Management, opened in 1991. That had grown over 30 years to a balance of $417,000. The account had been structured as a transfer-on-death account. The designated beneficiary was listed as Miriam Colton during her lifetime, and upon her death, in equal shares to Miriam's living descendants. I was not a descendant of Miriam. I was a descendant of both Gerald and Miriam. The language was specific and precise, and clearly not accidental. Pauline had 2 daughters. I kept my face still. "Is that the complete picture?" I said when Whitfield had finished. "That is a complete picture of the estate as structured." Whitfield said, "And the house?" I said, "The house transfers to Miriam outright." I nodded once. My mother did not look at me. Pauline looked at her hands. I asked Whitfield for a copy of the complete document. He said his office would prepare one. I gave him my email address. I thanked him for his time. I stood, buttoned my coat, and walked out into the cold Commerce Street air. I drove home on back roads. I did not turn the radio on. I had paid the property taxes on that house for 9 years. I had driven my mother to 47 cardiology appointments. I had arranged the landscaping crew, the contractor, the insurance renewals, the Sunday crosswords. I had done all of it without a ledger because it was never supposed to be a ledger. But my father had kept one. He just kept it differently than I had. On November 22nd, I met with Catherine Moorfield at her office on Grant Street at 10 a.m. I brought the envelope, still sealed. She examined the outside. She asked me if I wanted to open it there. I said yes. She handed me a letter opener. The letter inside was 2 pages, handwritten on my father's personal stationery. I read it once. Then I read it again. My hands were steady. My throat was not. I drove home from Catherine's office at 11:53 a.m. on November 22nd and sat in my car in the driveway on Delwood Road for a long time before going inside. The maple tree in the front yard had dropped its last leaves. The driveway was covered in them, wet and brown and pressed flat by the previous night's rain. The house looked exactly as it always had. The white aluminum siding, the black shutters Eleanor had chosen in 2003, the storm door with a brass handle she had ordered from a catalog and been unreasonably pleased about. Everything was exactly the same as it had been the morning before I found the envelope. Nothing was the same. I went inside. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with my father's letter in front of me and read it a 3rd time. He had written it in the spring, March, based on the day at the top, March 14th of the year he died. He had been diagnosed with a cardiac condition that would eventually take him the previous October, And the letter had the particular quality of a document written by someone settling accounts before they can no longer hold a pen. He wrote that he loved me. He wrote that he had always been proud of me. He wrote that I had been a better son than he had deserved, and that he knew it. Then he wrote the rest. He had made the decision about the Crestline account, he said, because he believed that direct inheritance created dependence. He had provided for my mother's security. That had been his first obligation. He had believed, he wrote, that I was strong enough not to need what he left behind, that I had always been strong enough, that my strength had sometimes made it easy to overlook me. He had written that sentence, and then crossed it out, and then written it again. I sat with that for a long time. The coffee went cold. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Delwood Road, and the sound of it faded, and the quiet came back. I thought about the property tax checks. $1,140 per year for 9 years. I thought about the furnace contractors and the porch boards and the Sunday evenings at the kitchen table. I thought about the Tuesday and Thursday drives to St. Raphael Medical, the same parking structure, the same plastic chair by the window, the same drive home alone. I thought about Eleanor, about the savings passbook in the top drawer with her handwriting on the first deposit slip, about the fact that she had never once suggested I do less for my parents, about the fact that she had never once suggested I keep a ledger. I was not going to contest the will. That was the first decision, and I made it clearly and without drama sometime around 12:40 in the afternoon. A will contest would cost money, take years, and produce nothing but a record of grievance. That was not what I wanted. That was not the kind of record I was interested in making. What I was interested in was something else. I called Catherine Moorfield at 1:15 p.m. She answered on the second ring. "Did you read it?" she said. "Yes," I said. "And?" "I'm not contesting anything," I said. "I want to do something different. I need you to pull the property records on Fenner Street." There was a pause. "The house." "The house," I said. 9 years of property tax payments. I want to know what that looks like as a documented contribution to the estate." Another pause. Longer this time. "Raymond," she said, "that's a legitimate claim. Under Pennsylvania law, undocumented contributions to a property's maintenance and preservation, particularly by a non-owner, can be recoverable under an unjust enrichment theory." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm calling you. The payments would need to be documented." "I have every check," I said. "Every one, in a file in my office. I have the bank statements going back to 2015. The silence on her end had a different quality now, the kind that happens when an attorney begins calculating. "Give me a few days," she said. I also called the Harwick Federal Credit Union that afternoon and asked them to prepare a full statement history on the savings passbook account Eleanor had opened in 1997. The woman on the phone said it would be ready by Thursday. I thanked her and hung up. I continued paying the Fenner Street landscaping crew through November. The final invoice of season, $240, which I had been paying since May. I did not tell my mother I had paid it. I paid it because the yard needed to be maintained. That was all. Something in me had settled into a kind of clarity that I recognized from engineering. The particular steadiness that comes when you have identified the problem correctly and can now begin to work on it methodically. My mother called on December 1st to tell me that Pauline's daughters had already been in touch with her about the Crestline account. The kitchen on Delwood Road smelled of coffee, and with smoke from the fireplace insert I had run the night before. The morning light came through the east window at a low angle and laid a long rectangle across the floor. I had been up since 5:30, which was earlier than usual. "They want to know when distributions will begin," my mother said. "That's between you and the account," I said. "Raymond, you're not angry, are you?" "No," I said. I was not angry. My voice was flat and even, and I was careful with it. "Your father did what he thought was right," she said. "You know how he was about money. He believed." "I know what he believed," I said. "You don't need to explain it." She paused. "I just want to make sure we're all right." "We're fine," I said. "I said nothing about Catherine Moorfield. I said nothing about the property tax records. I said nothing about the unjust enrichment calculation Catherine had called me about on November 27th. A preliminary figure of $61,840 in documented contributions To the Fenner Street property, over 9 years, exclusive of labor and time. On December 8th, my mother called again. Her tone had shifted slightly, lighter, more social. Pauline had visited for the weekend. They had gone through some of the items in the house together. She mentioned this the way people mention ordinary things when they want to make the ordinary feel authorized. Something in my chest tightened, not from what she said, for what she did not say. I called Catherine the following morning at 8:55 a.m. "Did you file?" I said, "I filed a claim with the Harwick County Court of Common Pleas on December 6th, said Catherine. "Docket number is in your email. The claim covers 9 years of documented property tax payments, the 2021 porch repair, the 2019 furnace contractor, and 3 years of landscaping invoices. Total documented amount, $94,200. I've also requested a lien on the Fenner Street property, pending resolution." My throat tightened. "Does she know?" I said, "She'll be served this week." Catherine said, "Before Christmas." I sat with that. I did not call my mother that week. She called me on December 12th. I let it go to voicemail. She called again on December 14th. Her voice on the message was different. Higher, tighter. The particular sound of someone who has just learned something unexpected. On December 15th, Pauline called from Wilmington. I recognized the number. I did not answer. On December 17th, at 9:42 in the morning, Catherine filed a supplemental declaration attaching the savings passbook history. Not because the passbook was part of the claim, but because it established a financial pattern. A man who had been quietly contributing to his parents' stability for decades while maintaining his own resources entirely independently. The picture it painted was precise, methodical, undeniable. My mother retained her own attorney, Howard Gaines of Gaines and Associates on Birchwood Avenue, on December 19th. Howard Gaines, property and estate attorney, called Catherine's office that afternoon at 3:15 p.m. and requested a preliminary meeting. I received a Christmas card from my mother on December 21st. It was a photograph of the Fenner Street house with snow on the hydrangea bush, taken from the street. Inside, she had written, "Raymond, I hope we can talk soon. Love, Mom." I sat on the kitchen table and looked at it for a while. The house looked beautiful in the photograph. The hydrangea bush was the same one she replanted every 3 years. I had helped her plant the most recent one in April of 2020, during the first spring of the pandemic, when she had wanted something to do with her hands, and I had driven over with a flat of new cuttings and a bag of bone meal, and the two of us had worked in the side yard for 2 hours without talking very much. I put the card on the mantel. I did not call her. On December 28th, Howard Gaines proposed a settlement figure of $40,000. Catherine called me that evening at 7:08 p.m. to relay the offer. That's 43% of the documented figure. I said, "Yes," Catherine said. "No," I said. She said nothing for a moment. Counter. "Full documented amount," I said. $94,200, or we proceed. "That's a strong position," Catherine said. "I know what I paid," I said. "I have every check." The meeting was held on January 11th at Catherine's office on Grant Street at 10 a.m. The room smelled of coffee and particular dry warmth of an overheated office in January. Catherine sat across from Howard Gaines, who was a compact man with a gray suit and careful eyes. My mother sat beside him. Pauline had called and asked to join by phone. Catherine had declined on procedural grounds. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. She was wearing the navy cardigan she wore to anything she considered formal. Her hands were folded on the table. She did not look at me when I came in. I sat down. I set my folder on the table. I said nothing. Gaines opened. He restated the $40,000 offer and added a new element, an acknowledgment in writing of my contributions to property, a letter of appreciation from my mother, formally drafted. Catherine looked at me. I looked at Gaines. "The documented amount is $94,200. I said. "I have every payment recorded. Bank statements, canceled checks, contractor invoices, landscaping receipts. 9 years of property taxes, the porch repair, the furnace. I'm not here to negotiate the record." Gaines looked at my mother. My mother looked at the table. "Raymond," she said. "Miriam," Catherine said gently My mother's hands went still on the table. "I know what I did," I said, not loudly, not triumphantly. I said it the way you state a measurement. I'm not asking for recognition. I'm asking to be made whole on what I documented. Gaines conferred with my mother in a low voice for approximately 40 seconds. I looked at the window. The street outside was quiet. A city bus went past, and the sound of it faded. Gaines sat back. "My client is prepared to agree to the full documented amount," he said. "Payable in 2 installments, 50% within 30 days, balance within 90. I looked at Catherine. She gave a single small nod. "Agreed," I said. I did not smile. I did not exhale theatrically. I picked up my pen and made a note of the date and time in my folder. January 11th, 10:47 a.m. The way I had been trained to document things. The way I had always documented things. My mother signed the agreement. Her hand was steady. She was 81 years old, and she had spent her whole life managing information carefully, and she managed this moment the same way. When we stood to leave, she looked at me for the first time. "Your father did love you," she said. "I know," I said. I picked up my folder. I buttoned my coat. I walked out into the January cold on Grant Street, and I did not look back. I drove home with the radio off. The roads were dry and pale, and the sky was a particular white of a Pennsylvania winter that has not yet decided what it wants to do. The first payment arrived on February 8th, $47,100. Wire transfer to the account Catherine specified. The second arrived on April 12th, the balance of $47,100. Catherine called me each time to confirm. I thanked her. I said I would be in touch if anything else arose. I deposited both amounts into the savings passbook account at Harwick Federal Credit Union, the one Eleanor had opened in 1997. The balance, as of April 13th, was $177,612. I did not tell anyone this. It was not information that belonged to anyone else. My mother and I spoke by phone in March, twice. The conversations were careful and brief. She was well. I was well. The hydrangea bush had survived the winter. I did not ask about Pauline's daughters or the Crestline distributions, and she did not mention them. In May, I drove past the Fenner Street house on my way to the hardware store. The hydrangea bush had new growth on it, small pale green leaves just beginning to open. Someone had raked the winter debris from the side yard. The porch looked solid. The boards I had paid to have replaced in 2021 had not shifted. I did not stop. I kept driving. There is a version of this story in which I am the wrong son who fought back and won, and I suppose that is technically accurate. But the thing I came to understand sitting at the kitchen table on Delwood Road in the November after my father died was something quieter than that. My father believed my strength made me unnecessary to protect. He was wrong about that. Wrong in the specific way that people are wrong when they confuse capability with invulnerability. The capable person still needs to be seen. The quiet person still keeps a record. Raymond Arthur Colton, 62 years old, and begin to understand the difference between what a family owes and what a family is. The savings passbook is still in the top drawer. Eleanor's handwriting is still on the first deposit slip. I add to it on the 3rd of every month. Not because I need to, but because it is the kind of patience that compounds over time. That is what I know now. That steadiness is not the same as acceptance. That documentation is not the same as resentment. That love and a ledger are different things. Even when the ledger turns out to matter, the whole difference, in the end, is who decided you were owed nothing. If you were the one who drove someone to every appointment, who wrote every check, fixed every board, showed up every Sunday, what would you have done with that letter? Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.